Hi. So I'm Greg LOBANOV. I'm talking about making my game Wandersong, which is a game about feelings. And I know as game developers, right away, a lot of you will be asking a big question, what are feelings? What do you mean when you say feelings? How can a game be about feelings? I want to kind of try to explain that by talking about how it's different from the work I've done previously. So these are screenshots of some games I've worked on in the past. And I would say across the board, in general, the core goal of any game is always to create some kind of engagement with the player. And usually the way that I try to create that engagement is by considering my game design, my game mechanics, my difficulty curve, the complexity of the game, how it teaches the player, to try to guide the player through an experience so that they keep playing, they stay interested, and they have something that is very thoughtful, makes them feel smart, gives them something triumphant, inspires them, makes them feel epic or really cool, gives them some experience that feels really cool. And if a player, out of that experience, if a player has an emotional experience kind of like through playing that game, that's definitely an encouraged side effect, but that's always a secondary goal to just kind of making something interesting and fun. Right? That keeps their interest. And I think that makes sense because the problem of making a game that is engaging and maintains interest is a really, really hard problem, like some of you have been talking about today. And games don't really have to be emotional to be fulfilling experiences. But our game Wandersong, I think a really big difference from our other games is that, so we approached the emotional experience of the game as kind of like the primary goal of it. So we considered every aspect of the game with a question of just, how do we want to make the player feel when they play this? And we let our answer to that kind of guide the design. And that kind of took precedent in many places over questions about difficulty curve, complexity, and all that other kind of stuff. And I was surprised to find and pleased to find that when we kind of let that guide our design decisions, we found our way to really graceful solutions for our game design and aesthetics and other aspects of the game. So I'm actually going to show you, I'm going to debut here live at Full Indie for the first time, our launch trailer for the game, which is not out yet. This game comes out in 2 weeks. So just to like totally whiplash you, this is now the very first thing that I ever did for the game, or kind of a historical reenactment of it. So the starting point for this game was kind of started from a question of just, could I make a game controller into a musical instrument? And this was kind of like my first little idea of just like, oh, what if I mapped one of the control sticks to just kind of this wheel that made sounds. And I was really surprised to find that it was really, really fun to play with just, on a blank screen like this by itself with no characters or anything. But kind of right away from this, it was clear to me that like this was already like a fun little interactive experience. It felt really fun just to make things up. And I was really curious then how far I could go, how far I could run with that idea of just like, what if I kind of give the player a really open creative space to just kind of play with this musical toy and try to give them gameplay that lets them express themselves and yeah, just kind of an open, expressive kind of game that lets them play with music. So I started having character ideas and world ideas. You can see on the left my very crappy kind of first little like concept sketch for what the game was going to look like based on Kirby's Epic Yarn. And then on the right was kind of like our first little GIF after I'd figured out just some of the most basic details about like what the game was going to play like. I had this idea for, so I wanted to kind of tell a story. I was really interested in how music could play into that. I really wanted to create like a character that would be kind of like the player's interface into this world, this like musical world of the game. And I kind of realized that to give the player a really like expressive experience, I had to give them a character that they really felt comfortable kind of playing the role of and who could kind of like take the place of the player. So like one thing that we did, like one really big decision that was apparent right from that first little GIF was that I made the character really big on the screen. I kind of approached that decision almost more like as a still art choice than like a design choice. It's unusual, when you compare it to other platforming games, like the face of my character is about as big as like the average character in another platformer. And this obviously like creates a lot of restrictions for our level design, and there's a really reason why other platformers do things this way, right? Like most platformers are about that spatial exploration, so it's useful to see lots of the level to explore. In Wandersong, I really wanted to focus on the emotional conveyance. Like I wanted the player's expressions and animations to kind of drive a big part of the player's experience. I wanted the player to really feel connected to that character. So that's why we made them really big. And I also did find that it kind of helped us in other ways. Like the character being so big actually makes it really hard to lose them on the screen, even though the colors are just like as obnoxious as possible. It did kind of force me to design my levels in much more kind of like small little chunks, and I found that it didn't really feel like a restriction once we kind of got into the habit of building that way. So I animated the character in a really particular way too. We didn't make like a faceless, personality-less character. We made a character with a really specific feeling that to me really kind of conveyed the feeling that I wanted the game to have and that I wanted the player kind of to have when they were playing the game. So the character is animated in this really specific, just goofy way. And the advantage of that really is just that like players can just run around, push buttons, do whatever they want, and it always feels in character, even when they're kind of trying to play sort of aggressively, like someone's talking to you and you're just like singing over them. I try to respect the player's possible choices in those cases and try to make it feel like their like choice to express themselves there was respected and that they actually could kind of feel like they put themselves in the game, even though ultimately they are actually playing the role of this really specific character. Okay. Obviously for platformers, the design of your world is always a really big aspect of the game, right? And then looking at other games, like for us, just as with most other platformers, we had a really big vision for wanting to have a world that was explorable. I wanted to feel kind of open. There was this feeling that I wanted to have of just, singing and running around and exploring this big space. And, to do that, we needed levels that were interesting and varied. The way that other games kind of usually achieve this is by having their games take place inside of caves or in buildings where they can use lots of geometry, or even if they don't take place in those places, they'll still use like very dense geometry everywhere. And yeah, of course it makes sense because if you don't have anything to jump on, then you end up with just like a flat plane. But I wasn't really happy with these solutions for our world because I wanted to have this kind of big open feeling, and I felt like these were really restrictive. They feel like intense, challenging games. And that's kind of how I came to the solution I was happy with for these kind of jump through platform things. So these shapes, they have like a depth in Z. So like when players land on them, they kind of go back into the background. This is awesome because it actually gives the levels a lot of space in X, Y, and in Z. So the levels actually feel even bigger than they are. And yeah, you can always see the sky. So it always just feels very open and happy. I like that. So another big thing was that, especially compared to other games, I really felt like this game wasn't going to work with lots of tiles or with kind of grid-based art. It's really about expression and individuality and kind of like that organic handmade quality. So I embedded that into this level editor that we made for the game. The way that it works, you can see I can just kind of like draw little points and I pick colors for it, and that becomes a shape in the game. It's like that easy. So that's how we make like geometry for the game. And that means that like every shape and every screen in the game is actually just a little bespoke asset, and it isn't actually that much work to do all of that. And the advantage is that, the game just has this kind of handmade, organic quality to it. It really feels like, everything is kind of made just for you. And it's nice because then, every part of the game is very individual. I can really focus on like designing every screen of the game to be unique and kind of to speak to the unique emotional experience of like where you are in the game right then. Same goes for colors. Colors were a huge, I love colors, and I wanted those to be kind of a huge aspect of the art. So those were also built very deeply into our level editor. So you can kind of see here how it works. We have this kind of like small palette of colors that everything samples from. And just by changing a couple colors and going back into the game, all the colors in the game, because they sample from that, change really quickly. So this is awesome because I had a lot of power to control the color design of the game, and I actually could iterate on the colors as a separate project from the design and layouts. So I could work on the game, I could think about the story of the game, I could change things, and I could actually go back and tweak the colors, and then it would actually tweak the feeling of large areas of the game without losing very much work, right? And as you can see, like in this progression, like my ability just to kind of pick colors that worked well progressed as well over the course of the game, and I was able to kind of like learn that at my own pace and apply that to the game without losing progress in other places. I didn't have to redo like art assets or anything like that. And I really try to take advantage of this. I focused on using a huge variety of colors and styles across the game, and I think that we were successful in that. Every frame of this game has a very unique feeling to it. And the bard themselves, actually, they also change colors based on the palette of the game. So really, like every frame of the game you look at, every color and every shape and every character on the screen is kind of uniquely made for that screen. And what that means is just that, we really like had so much fine control to make every part individual, to really kind of speak, just make lots of content to tell lots of little stories. And yeah, make every part just feel very different. We also we put a lot of thinking obviously into the way that things move and the way that it tied into audio. So this is a musical game. We knew the BPM, like the speed of every song in the game. So I made a habit of just tying every motion in the game to the BPM of the music so that everything kind of moves with this harmony to it. So like the wind that the grass blows with, the cycle that the bird goes on, the speed of their wing flaps, the bard's idle animation, the way that the flowers bob, and the way that these trees are kind of gently shaking. Like every single thing on the screen that's moving is actually moving to on some relationship to the beat. So there's just kind of this really nice, good feeling harmony. And of course, it brings the player's attention back to the background music, right? It ties all that together. So you really feel like that, you feel the audio as an aspect of kind of like the world, which is really important for this game. So as far as game design is concerned, I think one really big kind of innovation that we did with this game is that we, in as many ways as we can, we do not punish the player. I love playing with the music wheel. We tried to create lots of situations where a player could just mess around and make stuff up. But of course, to make a game that's interesting and fun, we had to make challenges where the player has to do a specific thing to pass, right? We have to make puzzles. We have to make these kind of challenges. What we tried to do in all these cases is make it so that when the player does something that, isn't what we expect, we don't set them back, we don't punish them, we don't even say that, we don't give them an indication they did something wrong, we just don't let them go forward until they do the thing that we expect. And what that means just that, so it really gives players the feeling that, there's no idea of failure in this game, right? You're always just playing, and when you're not getting it right, you just keep trying until you do. So I think that, just the experience of playing the game is actually really encouraging. In that way. And that really extends kind of to all of the game design, because players always feel that they can, the players understand that singing always leads to progression. So when they see like a new prop or thing in the game that they don't recognize, they always intuitively sing to it. They see how it responds to their music and they just start playing with it. So in kind of the grand scheme of things, like this game really doesn't feel like, there's not really like an even difficulty curve. If I was gonna chart it on a graph, it would be all over the place. But that's not the point of the game, right? It's not really actually about this one mechanic that builds and builds on complexity and challenges the player. It's really a museum of playful interactions. And I think it just feels really good, again, just to like play around to discover these things and play around with them. And players don't need like challenge to be engaged. It's just about giving them stuff that is really fun. And of course, yeah, like we do all this because we build trust with the player. We follow certain rules about how everything works so that they know what to expect, unless we break it. All of these kind of things I talked about are rules that we established early on in the game. We kind of established a certain kind of experience and expectation, and then we had a lot of fun breaking those rules in all kinds of ways to kind of give the players new experiences with that context. So one of my favorite examples is this character, Miriam. She is a really major character in the game, and she's actually one of the only things in the game that has a really intense negative reaction to you when you sing. In fact, when she does this, and this is our sound designer's idea, like the music all just turns off and doesn't start again until you sing. And she also, the character herself actually animates, she's one character who animates separate from everything else in the game. So she's not on the BPM unlike everything else. So she just feels like out of place. And all this stuff, it's like, it's funny, it's fun to play with her and to have that interaction. But especially, it's great because it really concisely tells you about her relationship to the bard, right? Players understand that immediately because there's so much context and she feels so different. It really makes her stand out and makes her like a standout, interesting character in the world of the game. When the bard is not feeling happy, which does happen from time to time, like when they're scared or when they're sad, we actually recorded a second set of all of their vocal lines so that instead of singing, they whisper. And this is, I really like this because what we do is we change the player's facial expressions. And of course, yeah, we change their facial expression for while they're singing. And the player is animated in such a way that their different faces are separate from like their body so that all those animations, like they kind of are like interchangeable and intermixable so that it was easy for us to kind of make this new content. And all we do is, we change the aesthetic of it, right? We change how it looks, and we change how it sounds. There's no change in like the way the player actually moves, but it completely changes the way that players act in the scene. And it really kind of, again, connects them to what the bard is feeling moment to moment in the game because we have so much control over, like what they look and feel and sound like. Players still are totally encouraged and open to express themselves and play the game, right? They can still spam notes, they can still do whatever they want. But because the bard is feeling so different, the game just feels different, even played the same way. And the art, of course, changes over the course of the game. In later scenes, when the bard is kind of generally not feeling as happy, we pull the camera out, we use more right angles, we use more monotone colors. You start to really feel like a palpable distance, emotional distance between you and the bard. And that is especially effective because of the context of how bright and chipper the early parts of the game are and organic. So I talked a lot about, there's all these rules that we broke, but what I found was that there kind of was this one unbreakable rule, and that was emotional consistency. And what I mean by that is just, we, I think, allowed our characters to live and react in the world of the game emotionally to things that happen. And then we think about how those characters feel and design the game around kind of like putting the player in those shoes and making the game kind of feel like how the characters are feeling, so that those things are always consistent. And as long as we follow that rule, as long as we, but we follow that rule sometimes to like create ridiculous extremes, but as long as we were doing things that really felt true to what the character was feeling, it always kind of works for the game. So one thing I was going to talk about was how, like this is a screen where you're kind of like a ship on a screen, you sail around. When the first time I implemented this screen, it actually was just a boat. And then you could use like the singing wheel to sail around, but you just kind of like, you knew the characters were on the boat, but you didn't see them. And I found that this scene got just so much better when I just put characters on the screen. And I think it's interesting because it just makes no sense. Like if you really think about it, I mean, it's like, why are they floating over the ocean like that? What's this camera perspective? What am I actually seeing? But no one has ever asked that. No one ever thinks that because, even though it makes no logical sense, it makes perfect emotional sense. I think players really appreciate that they get to maintain that connection to the character. And by kind of like grounding, all these events in the game, even these kind of like random one-off little scenes into like the character, what the character is doing, what the character is feeling, it really keeps players kind of like connected to the experience of the game. So I thought that was a really cool change. Another thing that I want to bring up about that Miriam interaction is not just that she reacts to you when you sing, but that if you keep on singing, she keeps on reacting to you. And in other games where I feel like there might be a limit to this, or she may only have one or two lines that repeat, I really tried to think through just if she's a real person, she really has an emotional reaction to you singing. So if you just stand there and keep singing to her, how would she react? And I think this is just a really fun thing for players to play with. But it also just really gives a lot of relevance to the feelings of the character. It makes them feel really real. And it kind of tells like a little mini story, right? Because there's this progression of interactions between the two characters. And this isn't just something that we did for this one character in this one scene. It's kind of a philosophy that we applied to all of the characters in the game. So this game has like 200 different characters in it. Not all of them have like a fully detailed, fleshed out interaction with the bard, but they do all have unique characters. They all have multiple interactions you can have with them. And the goal with that, again, was just to kind of, one, to reward the player for kind of pushing and to try things and to express themselves and look in places, to see what fun things there are. And because, all of these things kind of make these characters feel really real. And when we sit, by having Miriam react to the player singing, it kind of suggests, this idea that she's going to react. And when we follow through on that, right, we kind of let the player keep interacting and see where it goes. So kind of like my last example, which I think kind of ties a lot of those different things together, is about this big section of the game. So the design of the game changes in really dramatic ways over the course of the game, and I'm not, no spoilers, but so there's this one area of the game where the bard really is feeling depressed. They don't feel like themselves anymore. And in this part of the game, actually, you don't use singing to progress at all. You're actually in like a town sim, so you talk to different characters at certain times of day to progress the story. The entire town is moving on a clock, so characters are just moving with or without you. And there's this constant anxiety that players are feeling because of time, where if they miss an event that was supposed to happen at 9:30 p.m. at this location and they're not there, then they just have to come back the next day. And it's really like, if you look at this next to the beginning of the game, it's very jarring, the difference. But in context, because the way the bard's feeling, it feels like perfect. It totally kind of puts the player in the shoes of the bard and really makes them feel like how the bard is feeling during this part of the game. So, just like I was saying with other things, this isn't just this one part of the game. We applied this philosophy to like every part of the game, every aspect of it. We thought about how that part of the game felt, and we thought about our level design and just the way the game played, and kind of let it change so that the player's emotions or the character's emotions could have weight. And I do really feel like when the game, by having the game respect the emotions of the characters, the players would respect those emotions as well. I think that it really helped there be a conversation between kind of the design of the game, the feelings of the characters, and the feelings of the player. So that's my talk.